good to be here. It's good for us, for me personally, having come from the industry. I spent 15 years in the industry way back when. And one of the things I noticed when I joined JD Powers 10 years ago to come back basically into the industry as an observer, if you will, is not much had changed. And a lot of what we did, and I worked for small and mid-sized investment mortgage banking companies, not much has changed in the business since then and what I was seeing. So it's interesting to see how things have changed over the last 10 years. I met Justin and his team 2 years ago, I think, when they entered our study, and just about 20 seconds worth of information on our mortgage origination study. So we look at the top retail mortgage lenders in the country, and that's driven by market share. So nobody chooses to be in our study or chooses not to be in our study. It's the top 30 to 35 firms based on market share and the numbers that year that we get from a third party. We use Inside Mortgage Finance for their summary of HMDA data. So in that group, Prosperity several years ago became big enough to be targeted. And their first year in the study, they finished very high in our rankings. They're very focused on customer satisfaction. And last year they got to the top spot. And just a quick note on that, that's not JD Power saying that they're the best at customer satisfaction. That is their customers' reaction to it. And the way, basically what we do is we give a microphone to the customer and ask them how they feel. So it's not our opinion, it's the customers of Prosperity that are ranking them higher than any other lender that we surveyed. And we're capturing the top 70% of market share in the study. So one of the things we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about how Prosperity has gotten to that point. Obviously, they're doing very well in our study this year, which will be out in the beginning of November, and it will be interesting to see what happens there. But they've had great success with their customers, and their customers recognizing the efforts that they put into that experience. And they're doing it at scale. It's a lot harder to do this when you're, closing 10, 15, 20 billion a year as opposed to doing, 100 or 200 million a year. So one of the things we want to get Justin to talk about a little bit here is how to do that at scale, what the advantages are, what they focus on, what's important to doing that as an organization, and an organization that has, a big team of retail loan officers out there. And as we heard earlier today, a lot of focus is on keeping those loan officers happy, recruiting new loan officers, and making sure that they're able to do their job well. And in all that, how do you make sure that that gets through to the customer and the customer sees it and recognizes it? So why don't we kick it off with just getting a little sense from you, Justin, about how you really can execute such a great experience at scale.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks, buddy. One of the key things that the last few sessions have been about is about like recruiting, right? How do you get out there? What do you do? It's everyone's primary focus. How do I add top line revenue, right? And how do I do it the right way? And as part of that, we've kind of gotten this culture in the last, let's call it 5 years or something where, originators are very, very focused on their share of the pie, which makes sense, about where the company spends money on, where it's invested, what it looks like. Hey, is my manager getting 1 basis point or 8 basis points or 9? So when you're an organization like ours who, we've made all money you spend is just an opportunity to invest, and where you're going to allocate it, right? So when you decide to invest in inefficiencies in certain parts of your business, strictly focused on the customer experience, that's something you need to be open and honest with people about. Because if I'm meeting with an originator and they're talking, they're saying, well, what's my P&L going to look like, et cetera? I said, well, I'm just going to tell you, you're going to have an extra layer of processing management or processing and closing management, because not everybody, as you scale to a massive organization of 800 ops people or something, are going to feel battlefield empowered to make immediate decisions to move a mountain for the customer. So I'm going to have an extra layer that I add throughout the organization, right? Say in operations or in support, where immediate decisions can be made if someone is sitting at the table, or it's the day before closing, or it's a week before closing, we're trying to get something to happen. We're going to invest in that. And we're going to make it happen. And I'm going to say we are an intentionally bloated organization in certain spots, not in a lot of spots. We're going to make up for it by being ultra efficient in other areas, right? But that's what's going to happen. So I have to meet face to face and have these conversations with people. So I'm going around the country and individually meeting with recruits to try to get a temperature for what that looks like, right? And we'll recruit $500-600 million of production a year, if not more. Who knows? So it's a lot of work. But not having that and not understanding that, and not making sure you're culturally aligned in what that is just, it's so important. So at scale, again, it's difficult. And it's like when they're talking about, I forget what the gentleman said, but something about like boutique versus big, right? I think we want to be big, but feel boutique. And what that requires is a lot of hustle and a lot of dedication in a very flat organization. And, I think sometimes that's a mistake you can make, which is you make the organization too flat. And you pay for that in different ways, but I would always rather err on that side, which is the flattest organization possible with the most empowered leaders at every single line and as far down as you can go in the organization to make that decision. One thing we live by is like always be obsessed with finding an opportunity to impress. Okay. And that's impress anybody. That's impress a customer, impress a fellow team member, impress one of our partners, whoever that happens to be. Just find it. And you're never going to have to ask for forgiveness from me if you do something really, really stupid. But the outcome was that someone walked away ultra impressed with an experience, right? And, Bruce, what I'd say is that's what we're selling, right? We're selling experience here, because how often do people get a mortgage? How often do they buy a home? How often do they refinance, right? Not that frequently. So it's not like walking into McDonald's and then going to Burger King or Applebee's and Chili's where you can compare it pretty quickly, right? You're competing with other experiences that they have in every single consumer facing thing that they have. So again, making sure everyone's aligned, looking people face to face, understanding the investment thesis. Like if a company tells me where they're investing, I'll tell you what they care about. And so that's the conversation you have to have with people to do this at scale.
It's an interesting point. It's one of the things that we see when we look across many different studies and many different industries of top performers. And one of those things is a structure, and not just, there's a lot of talk about things, at a high level and a corporate enterprise level, but to have a structure that can step in and empower a customer when the customer isn't directly seeing it. So if something is happening, someone can step in and actually change that, make something happen. But we talk about that a lot, but very few organizations actually put structure around it and encourage it, because frankly, most people are cowed in a large setting to step outside of themselves, take a chance, do something different. We have something to solve. And it is really impactful when you see it. And it's something consistently that we see across many organizations that have very high performance with their customer. Another thing I would touch on, and this is sort of getting outside of the lines of what we normally do, but we break down satisfaction into several different, what we call dimensions. And one of them is a rating on your people. So your customer facing individuals, whether that's a loan officer, whether that's a processor who's following up on conditions, whatever that may be, a closing coordinator, that rating, we see that prosperity higher than anybody else's, and getting actually to record levels that we see across other studies. So it's interesting to see such an individually strong performance recognition amongst the customers in a world that is having a greater and greater preference towards more digital interaction. And that is something we've seen in the data as well. The preference for a completely digital mortgage has increased over the last 4 years. And there's more of an interest in it, especially amongst younger borrowers. Younger borrowers don't feel, though, that the current situation is sufficient to do a completely digital mortgage process. So they look for personal interaction. So I'm kind of curious as how you guys are looking at the mix between technology, artificial intelligence, everything involved there, while maintaining that personal feel that you've developed at scale.
Yeah. So I think a tagline that we use a lot is like, you don't have to be either high tech or high touch. You can actually do both. And there's a great middle ground. And an analogy that I like to talk to our team when we're building process in the back, right, is just think of you're in a mall. In a mall, you have a lot of options, right? And I use one that I don't know that there are many Dollar Generals in a mall, but Dollar General, Macy's, Nordstrom, and I'm not talking about price point. All right. What I'm saying is if you go to a Dollar General, you're probably not expecting someone to give you the advice on what to pick out or what to do. As a matter of fact, you might not even want to talk to a human. Or like one of the Amazon stores in the mall, right? You don't want to deal with somebody. You want to walk right out and you want the door to open up and you somehow paid for it. You don't even know how, right? Fantastic. Okay. That is one experience, right? At the other extreme is let's call it Nordstrom or Bloomingdale's or whatever it is. And that's walk in, maybe you're made to measure. Maybe you know the person that's helping you out. You feel very confident in it. You know, you're not exactly the most fashion forward person like myself. So you need some help. Okay. And then the middle, right, is what Macy's, right? So you walk into Macy's, you can talk to them. You can say, you can choose to, you know, kind of get help or not. If you throw the jacket on and it feels good, maybe you just say, okay, this seems to work or not. You talk to the person in the department, you say, do I look like an asshole in this or do I look good? And they say, okay, you look great, and you buy it and you walk out, right? So that's like the middle. That's how we have to tailor experiences, because what we find is a lot of people come in on one end or the other and they need something different. So a lot of people walk in thinking Dollar General is the answer, blah, blah, blah. And then they get an exposure. Because I mean, over half of our clients are first-time home buyers, right? So they run into the experience. They go, oh my gosh, no, I need someone's opinion to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Like, here's where I'm going to end. Here's where I'm going to start out. Other people, right, end up, hey, I'm going to go ultra tailored. I really want this help. And as they go through it, boom, they get some kind of digital approval. They fall back into the middle. So having that available for everyone. And then, you know, I'll go beyond that a little bit and I'll say, you know, this is just a lesson learned. Because I think it's really, really easy to sit and like, I remember the day that I saw, and I started at Rocket many years ago, so very close to all those people. I didn't know that the Super Bowl commercial was coming, right? Push button, get mortgage. Is that no shit moment for anybody? I think we all felt it, right? We're like, oh my gosh, the game has changed and I'm behind, right? So you move forward and you try to grab that. So Prosperity launched our kind of push button, get mortgage concept, let's call it 6 years ago, where, you know, we were in single source validations of bank statements, approval quickly. And I thought if I didn't have the ability to approve somebody in 24 hours or less, and at that point we still wanted a human kind of in the loop, right? But not extraordinary. I could have probably approved him in 15 minutes. I was going to be lost entirely. And that's what the consumer wanted. And they wanted absolutely no interaction with their mortgage lender. And that was the superior customer experience. In fact, here's what we found, especially in purchase. Okay. So refinance is a very different ballgame. I'm talking purchase lending right now, which is a little bit different, right? If somebody comes to me and I approve them in 15 minutes, but their purchase contract still says 30 days, that actually created more consternation and concern for a consumer over those 30 days because I didn't want to have contact with them, right? I signed like one person to this, one human, to say, hey, I can just put one human in this loop. It's automated. I don't have to worry about it. What I found is that I actually needed to put in an entire layer of people that all they did was follow up and say, everything's okay. And sending an email wasn't enough. Sending a text wasn't enough. They wanted to talk to a human being to say, don't worry, everything's on track. Your house is going to show up. Things are going to happen. So again, is that high touch? No, but it's touch, right? So complete high tech needed to be augmented by another human being telling them everything was fine, which is odd. But it was 100% the facts that we found and what we still do today. So we have a constant follow-up cadence on people. About 24% of our Fannie and Freddie eligible loans are basically one-touch loans, which means they're approved in under 15 minutes. It doesn't mean that the work really completely eliminates. I mean, it's way cheaper than the other operational paths, but they also require follow-up, feedback, et cetera, to make sure things are going on. So that's just an area where, again, high touch or high tech does not necessarily eliminate that, but also finding that middle ground, more the Macy's approach where, hey, someone still wants some kind of loan officer, mortgage consultant in there to give them some feedback on making sure they're doing the right thing because they just want the assurance that this life decision is verified by someone who's a little bit more of an expert.
That prompts 2 points that we've seen lately in the data. And the first being one of the elements, as I mentioned earlier, the dimensions we measure revolves around communication. And we do some scientific data science regression around this to figure out which of these 6 dimensions is most impactful to the way people think about the experience and how it lasts in their mind. The number one dimension is communication. For mortgage, it's different in different studies, but for mortgage origination, it's about communication. And this really is about, as you mentioned, it's about managing anxiety through the lending process. And we've seen this across many different lending products. And it doesn't really matter how, how qualified you are. There's still a level of anxiety between that approval, that application approval, and then closing. Especially in a first-time home buyer, that closing process very highly anxious, and a lot of touch there goes a long way. But how do you do it efficiently? So it's interesting to see and hear how you approach that. We see this differently. You look at some of the more platform directed consumer lenders, and they have great technology that'll give you a sense of, like you've seen from Amazon, you can track that package down your block and actually see where that delivery van is. You get a sense of being able to do that now and with a lot of lenders. So I know exactly where I stand in that process, what comes next, who's responsible for it, what's been done. I can see what's done, that kind of thing. But it's the personal interaction that we see still driving the highest levels of satisfaction. And that's why, at the top of our rank charts in the last couple of years, you see distributed retail lenders, you see bank lenders. Banks bring in this perception of financial advice. And so the other thing I wanted to touch on, and this is somewhere where for an independent mortgage bank, Prosperity does really well with this engagement model. And basically, we've seen over the past 4 years, more borrowers reaching out to a mortgage lender before, and this is for purchase borrowers, before they talk to a real estate agent. So they're actually finding out about financing. They're talking to lenders. They're engaging with lenders before they even start to look for a house. This group of people, which has grown to 46% in our last bit of numbers for Gen Y and Gen Z, millennials and Gen Z, it's 50%. So 1 out of 2 borrowers is reaching out to a lender before they talk to a real estate agent. Their numbers, 90 points higher for trust and 80 points higher for satisfaction. They are 46% less likely to put in a second application. They don't shop around as much, and they're much more loyal going forward. So it's this early interaction and this ability to create an advisory experience. Now, we've heard this. I've heard this sitting through sessions this morning. But how do you actually do that? And the lenders that score really high in this, without a doubt, are mostly banks. You got Chase and Citibank and Bank of America, the big bank lenders who have this broader financial relationship. Yet there's Prosperity at the top of the list of the independent mortgage bankers at having almost 2/3 of your borrowers saying they reached out to you before they started looking for a home and spoke to a real estate agent. So it's an interesting number, but it has so much impact on a lot of metrics that are very important to mortgage lenders. So I'm just curious as to how you see that developing amongst your customer base.
It's a really difficult thing. I mean, top of funnel and purchase is one of the hardest. I'll say this, which is banks are at least for now going to lead that category. What you'll see as a fast follow on is kind of the Rockets and the Zillow Mortgages of the world really lead in that category as well, because they're a brand. For us, I think, especially when you look at our historic markets, which are more the mid-Atlantic, et cetera, we've been established in those markets for 25, 30 years. So you have secondary, you have kids purchasing where the parents purchased before and that sort of thing. So we do have some knock on there. In addition, we really, really work hard at using predictive analytics to drive what the next purchase will be, therefore proactively reaching out to past customers to figure out what that purchase is and then giving that back to the realtor. But, I'd say there's no magic bullet to this. It's very, very difficult to get top of funnel because, again, we are, just to give you guys a second, so we are actually a realtor affiliate. So I'm owned by Home Services of America, which has about 40 brands throughout the country, 40,000 real estate agents, et cetera. So about 50% of our business comes as direct affiliate referrals from them. Then we get top of funnel, then we get outside, then we get direct marketing and those types of things. So again, I would just say the best people to ask how to do that is hold the people's money in your bank, and they'll probably reach out to you for step one. Outside of that, it's a lot of inside baseball, a lot of hand-to-hand combat to try to get in front of that. To get I would say you need to be about 3 weeks before market. So that market minus 3 weeks to really focus at top of funnel. And then beyond that, have the buyer's agency agreements, which allows you to get pretty close, or kind of a showing agreement. Any of those types of things get you as close to top of funnel as you can get in purchase other than that.
So in this environment, and especially I sat through a couple of sessions talking about recruiting loan officers, and we see this often in the media. We see lawsuits too about suing one company for stealing other loan officers. So if you're going to focus on borrower experience, a lot of these larger direct retail lenders really consider the loan officers, and rightly so in a lot of ways, as their primary customer and the borrower as a secondary customer. I mean, how do you find retention of loan officers, recruiting new loan officers in that environment? Is that a challenge?
Oh, absolutely. Again, it goes back to what we said off the bat, which is, you have to be culturally strong about something, lean into it, say, this is what we invested in, this is our identity. And, really to your point right there, it's about defining who the customer is. And honestly, if I'm a loan officer and I walk in and someone's honest with me and they say, who's your customer? And they say, your branch manager, that's probably not going to make me feel great. And sometimes it's the mortgage consultant. So as an organization, we took a step back, and this was probably 4 years ago, and we really made it a mission to define the customer. And for us, the customer was kind of threefold, depending on where you are in the organization, right? It's the borrower, but it's also the real estate professional. Okay. So the real estate professional being the customer, and then the borrower being the customer. To a mortgage consultant, your operations team is your customer. To the operations team, the mortgage consultant is the customer. When you're post-closing, you have the most customers, right? So it's all about, you're on the shoulders of whoever is in the transaction before you. But if you are absolutely, I'll just say this, if your focus is purchase and you are absolutely obsessed with the realtor experience or the real estate professional experience, everything else fixes itself. Okay? And beyond that, if you're absolutely obsessed with the relationship between the sales organization and the support organization, and you invest in mutual respect between those two, and you focus on the outcome from the realtor, because if you think about it, the lifetime value of a customer is maybe 2 or 3 transactions. The lifetime value of a real estate professional can be 60, 70, 100, 200 transactions. So why wouldn't your organization just be hedgehogged around the real estate professional experience? Right? So again, I think that's the focus. You focus on that, and you make the customer the person who's going to lead to the most long-term business. Now listen, if I sit with you and I'm recruiting you and I say, all right, so when you come into this organization, over the lifetime of the next 15 years, I'm going to guarantee that you do 300 more transactions. That sounds great, but the person that's recruiting them with a much more instant gratification pitch might be a little better off. But that's why I want to meet people face to face, because I want to talk to them and tell them that and walk them through it. And if they don't get it, they're not bought in and they don't want to work for that. Like the people who say, hey, I can make 30 more basis points somewhere else. Why would I want to work for you and double my volume and have to do more work to make just a little more money? I'm like, okay, that's not the person for us, right? Like, we are going to invest in the experience of everybody. We're going to be inefficient. We're going to do some things while also being tech forward, right? And again, that's how you eye to eye look at people. And I think it all comes back to the number one thing to do as an org, if I were building something from scratch, would be to put on the board, who is my customer? And then you just build it around that. Because the age-old thing of Amazon, like, hey, being obsessed with the customer wins. I agree. I just think, like you said, defining your customer has to come first. And I don't think that people have necessarily done a great job of that, especially when it's built strictly around like this branch manager culture, which very valuable and hugely important people. But when that's all your focus is, I think you lose sight of kind of the other stuff. And the borrower has to be in there, and it's very important. But again, a bad borrower experience impacts very few, like a little bit less lifetime value than a bad realtor experience. And if you're obsessed with the realtor experience, the customer experience is naturally going to happen, and it's going to follow on along with it.
Yeah, we're seeing so much of that focus. Referrals and family and friends actually in our study data slightly outpaces real estate referrals. So, and one of the unique things that I've always found is when we look at average satisfaction by referral source, the lowest satisfaction comes from those referred by builders, and second by real estate agents. Family and friends drives the highest satisfaction. So in long-term value, realtors rise to the top because that's the repeat business, right? But the referral of friends, family, and colleagues is also in that calculation. I mean, we see that, and it's grown, not a lot, but it's grows 1% to 2% each year over the last 4%. So that's becoming more and more, especially around first-time home buyers and especially amongst younger buyers. Gen Z has the highest percentage of taking referrals from friends and family, but they're also more likely to do research on the internet. So it's a whole different ball of wax as we're moving into a younger buyer, persona. They're more questioning, they expect more, as you said, their digital expectation comes from outside the mortgage industry, comes from other experiences they have digitally. And Michael can tell you about mobile apps and what they expect to see there. And it's just not quite there yet in the mortgage business, but they're ready and willing and there to accept it if you can do it.
Well, let me just say this. Like, I don't know if you guys are listening to the amount of data he's giving and the amount of different like vectors of approach and layered decision making that JD Power provides. I think as an industry, like we love the survey, right? Like experience.com. I don't know. We use that. Anybody use that, right? Like, it's like, we love the survey. Look how many 5-star Zillow ratings I got, or 4.5 star, which are awesome and vital and important, but they don't really give you the depth of how you can change your business to better satisfy people. Because guess what? When you're taking a survey at the closing table and you just got your keys, that's a pretty emotionally charged moment. So it's either going to be really, really good or really, really, really bad. Like, there's two outcomes of that survey, right? The cool thing about JD Power is it happens after the emotion has been taken out. It's months after. It's all these things where people have had the time to marinate and live in the house and be pissed that the floors creak in certain spots, right? And all this stuff. And then they give the honest feedback of what happened. And they also then can dive down and say, okay, if I can pivot here, I can pivot there. It's not about winning JD Power. It's about winning the best customer experience possible. That's what you want to do, right? JD Power is cool to win, right? It's a very neat thing. But at the end of the day, if your consumers are just twice as satisfied as the person down the street, it's a virtuous cycle and a flywheel that just builds recruiting, retention, growth in business, et cetera. It's a pitch, dude. There you go.
I couldn't agree more.